Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of On the Rocks. And I'm here today with Jill Officer to, I guess the word is break down the 2021 Brier that has just concluded in the Calgary bubble. A very exciting Brier, Jill, and, an amazing win by Brendan Bottcher finally coming through in a final on his fourth try. Hard not to be happy for the guy and for all his teammates. It must have just been an incredible feeling. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we would have had a great representative no matter who won yesterday. That's the good news. But going into the game, I trying to put myself in Brendan's team's position and trying to figure out how we would have approached a situation like that where we had lost three finals in a row. I'm not sure I totally had an answer for it, but wow, they sure showed up, didn't they? I mean, they still brought their A game. I think Brendan Bottcher himself played 97%. And now there wasn't, a ton of rocks in play maybe for the first half of the game. There was some blanks. I mean, they tried a little bit, but I don't really blame either team for the situation. It's kind of part of the game and part of the strategy sometimes too. So I was just happy to see them bring their A game, and yeah, it just felt really good for them afterwards with just knocking on the door for a few years here now.
Yeah, and Darren Molding, pretty emotional guy, and has been after the losses for the last 3 years. And to hear him say, "This has just been a dream for as long as I can remember. It's been my lifelong goal." You feel pretty happy for anybody in that situation. And even Kevin Cooey had to admit he was a little bit happy for them. He wished that he hadn't been the one that lost to them, but even he was a little bit happy for them, because how can you not be when they finally persevere and break through and do that? And the key to me though was that incredible shot that Bottcher made to win the semifinal over Matt Dunstone. I mean, crushing loss for Matty, who thought he had it, and Bottcher makes an angle raise, takeout, and sticks to win it. I mean, that's the kind of shot that champions make, right?
And he was making a lot of those shots all week, and he has for the last 4 years at the Brier, and that's what's gotten them as far as they have gotten in the last number of years. But yeah, I mean, under pressure, needing that point. I did feel bad for Dunstone's team, but even the commentators were talking beforehand, particularly Cheryl, saying that they're leaving that there for them. Maybe they should try and get that the guard that Matt threw on his last one to get it a little deeper, to not only block the hole, but to also block that angle run. I think the way the rocks were staggered, I'm not sure with the curl and the ace whether they could have blocked both, but I certainly would have liked to seen them try. But yeah, I mean, for Brendan to make that shot still under that pressure and to dead nut it, stick it for the win was spectacular, and probably gave them a lot of confidence going into the final.
Well, you've never been involved in a shot like that, right?
No.
Of course.
Oh, come on now. I played with Jennifer Jones, right? We all know I played for Jennifer Jones, and I got to have a front row seat to a number of shots like that. So
Well, you swept on what I would say is the greatest shot in the history of curling, to be honest. I don't think anyone would argue with the fact that in-off for four in St. John's in 2005 was something amazing. And I mean, just tell us how exhilarating is it to be a part of something like that?
yeah, it really is spectacular. And, thankfully we have the technology of video that allows us to relive it all the time. And they've been showing that highlight recently, actually, leading into some of the games on TSN. And it's been exciting to watch it every time. And I just laugh at how crazy I go, and like, chicken legs and arms everywhere, and my mic's falling off. I remember, but actually sweeping that shot, I was very close to the edge of the sheet, like to the boards, and the foam boards. Like if you ever trip on them, they're sometimes worse than normal boards. So I remember thinking on my, as we were sweeping, I remember thinking, okay, just don't trip, just don't trip. But, and then just the exhilaration that came after that, just the natural, uh, you know, adrenaline and the screaming. I think the girls compared my screaming later on to being on like a ride at Disneyland. Like we went on a roller coaster once, and just the way I was screaming, it was very similar. So it was pretty exciting to be part of that. But as much as that was a great moment, I can think of other moments where I felt that same way. It might not have been as flashy of a shot, But I can think to the draw in the semifinal at the Olympics against Eve Muirhead's team, and we had to draw to the forefoot to basically guarantee ourselves a medal and to get into the gold medal game. And I remember feeling that same similar exhilaration, even though it was just a draw to the forefoot.
Fantastic story, Jill. Amazing memories for you. Just to get back to the Brier, though, prior to the well, on Saturday, I guess, before we got to Championship Sunday, there was certainly some controversy there, and that revolved the sandpapering of the rocks on Friday night. I think curlers had spoken to the ice maker, Gregor Wasco, and had said that they felt like there wasn't enough curl. And then he does something that happens at many, many events, which is to treat the rocks with sandpaper in order to get them to curl more. However, you know, at least one team and one person involved with the team was not told that it happened and was very frustrated. Glenn Howard was on the first practice with his team, and they struggled a lot. They didn't have a good last stone draw. They didn't have a good practice. And he wanted to redo it because he felt like it was an unfair situation. You've been in these situations many times. What are your thoughts on that whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say it was a really unfortunate situation how it all played out, and it certainly was unfair and kind of disappointing that that's how it all played out. I will give Curling Canada credit in the sense that the statement that they put out did acknowledge that they had a communication breakdown, because I really do believe that that's exactly what it was. Is there was a miscommunication, a communication breakdown, a lack of communication. And probably the only reason that some teams knew was because they went and spoke to the ice maker. And that's totally common for teams to go and speak to the ice maker. But sometimes if you go into the building and you head out onto the rink and you don't happen to catch the ice maker, you might not speak to them. So it probably is, that's how it kind of happened, and that Howard's team didn't end up knowing. You know, so I don't think we'll ever see this happen again, which, you know, unfortunately it did happen, but this will never happen again now. There is always going to be that communication. I think it was a lesson learned for everybody. And unfortunately, Team Howard, you know, was the ones that didn't end up knowing. And, you know, admittedly, he said, you know, we just didn't adjust well to the practice either. Now, in terms of the time between the practice and the start of the game and whether they could have rethrown the rock, I've tossed that around in my head a little bit. And I thought, well, I don't know, then do you still have to let the other team throw their draw to the button again as well, like out of fairness? I don't know. And I think that time crunch just put so much pressure on everyone to make a decision that I just don't know could have been made in that short window of time to be fair to everybody. But I don't know. It was just unfortunate that it happened, and I don't think we'll ever see it happen again.
Well, they did lose that game to Brad Gushue. They started without the hammer. They lost the game. Gushue got a deuce right away, and they went on to lose their next game and were eliminated, didn't make the playoffs after an amazing week. But with Wayne Middaugh at skip, I mean, they were the story of the Brier right up until the weekend. But I think that an issue that may also come out of that is that Glenn, you know, and a lot of the curlers admit that having first practice is a disadvantage. And, you know, Brad Gushue admitted that as well. He said, you know, we got to go second practice. We knew what was going on. It was a different story for them. And Brad even suggested that they throw in different directions, which I believe is what happens at the Grand Slams in terms of how they practice. And, you know, there's other things that came up from Russ Howard on the TSN broadcast. He was saying maybe this all needs to go to 8 ends. Maybe they need to not draw to the button, but to draw to the wings in the opening, and even to change the fabrics on the brooms. And I think the suggestion is that the slide path is breaking down late in games, and it's not creating the best competitive situation. What do you think about all that?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. But first of all, I think I'll just point out that I believe that this was the first time at the Scotties and the Brier that in the pregame practice, they actually had to do 2 draws. So they had to do an in-turn draw and they had to do an out-turn draw. So I remember when we first experienced this was actually at the World Championships in 2015 in Japan. And it was really challenging to be able to get both of those paths cleaned up to the point and keened up to the point that you could do a draw to the button and have a good idea of what you needed to throw and what the line needed to be. So really having to work both sides of the sheet in that short 9-minute period is very challenging. And this is the first year that we've seen that at the Brier and the Scotties. They've been doing it now at the Worlds for a few years, but I'm not sure that I still am not sure that I really love that. I still like the idea of each team breaking down one side, and maybe you need to do, if you want to use 2 draws to the button, then maybe they both are on the same side. I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I do think that having first practice when you have to do both sides is even more of a disadvantage than it is when you're only working on one side of the sheet. So yes, there's that issue. There's the issue of the pebble breaking down, and I think we see it maybe a little bit more in the men's game, perhaps. Like I felt like that was the sense, because the men are breaking down the pebble maybe a little bit more. And that is certainly a variable when you look at the 8 versus 10 debate. But the 8 versus 10 debate doesn't just come down to ice conditions. It comes down to the statistics that we see in the 8-end game versus the 10-end game. It's the TV time, it's the marketing. There's so many variables that go into making that decision. And I think that that's why we haven't quite seen that happen yet at the world level, which would then make it at the Brier and Scotties level.
Do you think it will happen, 8 ends?
When I hear people talk, it sounds to me like it's inevitable. But I really think it's important for the WCF to get it right and to make sure that they're doing it for the right reasons and not just because everybody thinks it's better. So I think that there's some research going into that, and there's some things and discussions going into that will facilitate making that decision. Whether we see it, I do think probably inevitably it will change to 8 ends. I'm not sure that it's going to be this next quadrennial, but that'll remain to be seen.
I like Brad Gushu's take on it. He said he compared it to a major in tennis, where the regular tour events are 3 sets and then the majors are 5 sets. And he was saying, well, maybe the regular tour events are 8 ends and the majors, which is the Brier and Scotties, are 10 ends. I mean, I thought that was cool perspective, but I mean, I've heard many times that it's going to 8 eventually, and I think that's where it's going to go eventually.
Yeah, and you know what? I 100% agree with Brad, and I've really been back and forth on the 8 versus 10 debate. When I was toward the end of my career, when I was playing, I really liked the 8 ends, but I think it was because I was getting older. And then as I reflected, I felt the same way as Brad. I thought about it in that same way, where the championship games, the longer games, I think that they're better. But we also have to take into consideration, the number of games that athletes are playing in a year. And does that make, are we adding too many ends? I don't know. Like I said, there's so much sort of debate on it, and I'm not really sure what the best answer is. And I know myself, I go back and forth a lot.
There's always debate on the rules of curling. I mean, it's amazing how much this sport changes. And I mean, just since you started playing as a teenager until you ended your career, I mean, it changed a ton. So I think we can always expect changes. And I think that's good. If a sport is willing to move with the times and try to get better, isn't that the goal?
Well, 100%. And I think that's exactly why we see the changes, is because curling has only been an Olympic sport since 1998. That's really not that long. And since it came in as an Olympic sport, I think, there was a few changes prior to that, like with the free guard zone coming into place. And that led up to the Olympics. And then there was more changes after that. And I think it's just always a progression in trying to bring more and more people involved in the game and bring more and more people to watch the game. And we see that happening every time the Olympics go around. So, if we can continue to work to make it attractive and change with the times, because there's also so much technological change, and people are not just sitting watching curling anymore. They're on their phones, they're on their iPads, they're multitasking. So how do we keep people engaged around that as well, right? And so I think it's important to change with the times, and that's what curling is doing.
Jill, I want to thank you so much for all of your analysis during the Scotties and Brier. I know you're headed to the World Curling Championship bubble in a couple of weeks, and we'll catch up with you again there.
Sounds good.
Awesome, Jill. Thanks so much. For Jill Officer, I'm Ted Wyman. You've been watching On the Rocks.